it's not just the Palestinians that have to fly in on the same day. It's also something that Americans are doing, crossing many time zones and coming straight to Oslo to give this talk, despite a premiere, I think, yesterday or for, yeah. It's American designer and composer César Alvarez, who has been making some really interesting things where the audience in musicals are able to take part and interact with the story. So please give a hand to César.
Hi. Well, thank you. This is really an honor. And I love describing to people in New York what I'm doing. It's just, when you just say you're going to Norway to talk to LARPers about musicals, they really raise an eyebrow, which I love. It's been really great. So much of what's been talked about today is connected to what I'm working on. In particular, hearing James talk about theater was super interesting, and I want to jump off of that conversation too a little bit. I'm a composer. I come out of a jazz and experimental music tradition, and later on, after grad school, I decided sort of on a whim to write a musical, and to the dismay of all of my faculty at my graduate program, and I barely made it out alive with my musical as my master's thesis, and that launched me on a career in the theater, which was new for me when I was 28. And so in the theater world, I became this sort of outsider that was making musicals. And then after doing that for a few years, I decided to jump off another deep end and start incorporating audience participation into my musicals, which then made everyone that I had so tried to win over again distrust me, which it seems to be a pattern. But essentially what I was doing, and this is in 2013, was I was trying to write a musical about space, and I wrote this musical about these two astronauts who were really bored in a spaceship, and it turns out it was a really boring musical. And I kind of went back to no one's ever read it or heard it, and I went back to the drawing board to try to figure out what was it about science fictional scenarios that really grabbed my imagination, and I started thinking about the immersion that happens in novels and in films. And theater is so good at so many things, and it's also so bad at some things. And one of the things about theater is, in traditional format, it's on a proscenium, but it's also very physical. So it's hard to transport someone completely out into a science fictional scenario when you're standing right here in flesh and blood talking to them. There's a certain kind of presence that is kind of intractable in theater, which is why we love it, but also which is also a kind of a limitation. And so I went on this journey to try to figure out how to expand a science fictional universe in the theater to include people in a different way, which led me into immersive theater. And I want to read this Brecht quote, which has sort of been my lighthouse a little bit for the last few years. He says, "It is not enough to demand insight and informative images of reality from the theater. Our theater must stimulate a desire for understanding, a delight in changing reality. Theater must teach all the pleasures and joys of discovery, all the feelings of triumph associated with liberation." And Brecht is a hero of mine because he demanded his theater be active in the present lives of his audiences, and he demanded that his audience leave his performances trying to answer a question actively in their lives. And in a lot of ways, I feel like he was trying to scrape at what a lot of what is happening in both participatory theater and also in LARP, particularly Nordic LARP. Because what I find happens in Nordic LARP is this incredible demand that we inhabit alternative choices and ways of being and levels of identity, which also is really interesting because that's what musicals do. In every musical, a character has a way of speaking, and then they burst into song, which is totally bizarre, yet somehow manageable. And what's interesting about every musical is every character every main character in almost every musical has two voices, the spoken voice and the sung voice. So most musicals in some way have to grapple with layered identities and with the generation of identity through alternate voices, which I feel like is such an incredible way to think about what we're going through now as we build our lives around social media and as we try to unveil the different codes that we're operating within. And LARP does that really well, and I think theater has a real possibility of being part of that conversation. So what I realized is I wanted to turn this space musical into a immersive thing, and I looked to video games because it was sort of this storytelling format that was participatory, yet also sort of theatrical. And one of the things I noticed about video games when I started, I was like, okay, I'm gonna play Halo. And I started playing Halo, and they have a scene, and then you play. And you go, 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 go. And then you have a scene, and you play, right? So it's scene, play, scene, or cut scene, as they call it in video game design, gameplay, cut scene, gameplay, which is so much like musicals, which are scene, song, scene, song, scene. And I started to superimpose this idea, which was we can choreograph moments of story, and then we can insert moments of interactivity to move the story along in a different way. Here we're operating on these different ways of identity. Here we're creating an immersive environment where the audience has a meaningful role, which I think is what is so important about immersive theater. A lot of what people call immersive theater is really ambulatory theater. As many LARPers have complained to me about over the years, I went to Sleep No More, but I didn't get to do what I wanted to do, right? And I think as incredible as Sleep No More is, I think it's sort of just the beginning of what is possible with what if we created these really emergent, co-created scenarios where we really could have a meaningful impact on the story. So the Universe is a Small Hat is the name of my piece, which was born. And before, I'm going to play you a little video of it and then talk a little bit about how it's built. But as I was interviewing video game designers to try to figure out how to build this world, Syed Salahuddin, who's one of the founders of Baby Castles, this is an indie game museum gallery in New York. He heard me talking about it, and he said, "Oh, you need to learn about Nordic LARP." And of course, I knew what LARP was, and I knew that Nordic meant Vikings. So I just imagined like a Viking in a forest hitting someone. I was like, no, this isn't like that. He's like, no. Like, you look it up, and this is 4 years ago, and I started researching Nordic LARP, and I realized that for 20 years, this community has been solving the problems that I was trying to solve just out on my own, thinking no one had ever solved them. Which is why for the last few years, I've just been devouring a lot of the information, a lot of the games, and a lot of the theory behind what you all have been doing, and trying to incorporate it into experiences which are outward facing for a theater community. So all of the pieces that I make are pretty much for people that they don't even know what LARP is. They're just coming to an immersive theater piece. One of the nice things about Sleep No More and the other immersive pieces that are in New York is it's given a lot of excitement around, oh, I could come to a theater show and any number of things could happen, and which has given my work a lot more leeway in what we do. And there's also a scene of people that are just really hungry for this. So I delved into this and I started creating this piece. I'm going to play you a video, hopefully, which will work. And this is just a little short video of some scenes from a play test. We had a residency at Baby Castles, which is the gallery in New York City. We had 9 rehearsals and 9 shows over 4 months. And each time it was an iterative process, so we kept building it and changing it and developing it. And I'll show you this little clip. So you get a little taste of how ridiculous that was. One of the ways I describe this to non-LARPers is it's sort of like a party with a story. It's a 3 to 4 hour experience that it tells the story of a space colony. And so my 2 astronauts board in a spaceship turned into a space colony full of 100 people and a bunch of AIs, which was way less boring. When you come to the show, you go through an 8-step intake process, which is essentially a theatricalized Nordic workshop where we are bringing you step by step into a role play, an understanding of who you are within the fiction. And what we realized is, at first we said, "Oh, don't worry, just be yourselves. It's 100 years later, no big deal." And we worried, because we worried, oh, people aren't really gonna know how to role play. It's and what we were actually really wrong. And the more character we gave them, and the more tools we gave them to role play, the more they were able to immerse. And we ended up with some really incredible role play and what we all know is that we all know how to pretend, and we've been doing it since we were kids. Mostly we just forgot when we got awkward in middle school, right? And so a lot of what it was is just creating that alibi for people to pretend. And without calling it a LARP, people sort of picked it up. One of the other things that's really exciting is, because of our gaming culture now, pretty much anyone under the age of 35 will take some sort of system or game and sort of intuitively learn how to play it. And we found that to be true with this interactive system too. People felt really free to just not know how to play it in a way that was really shocking and really exciting. This is just a little picture of what happens when one of the first intake processes is you take a test. And the test is an algorithm which we designed to essentially gauge how we think you want to play. And what that does is, after the test, you get an occupation. There's 6 occupations on the ship. The occupations are flexible, and you can be really bad at your occupation or really good at your occupation, and you can also change your occupation. But what happens is we give you a track to go on, and a sort of a community to be a part of. So I'm going to talk about the occupations a little bit. These are our nice Chinese fanny packs that we bought. It was from Alibaba. It was amazing. And so you get sort of issued a bunch of random junk that has to do with whatever your occupation is at the beginning to help you navigate it. We thought they were very fashionable. And the other thing that happens is you fill out a customs card, which has a bunch of your information about who your character becomes and who it is. And some of that is given to you. So for instance, the 2 colors are the output. When you take your test, you get an output of 2 occupations, a primary and a secondary. And then when you meet with the AI supervisor, they determine which one you actually are, based on a few things. And then the entire ship, this is from a run we did at Sarah Lawrence College at a university. The non-player characters, and I love what James said about non-player characters still being players, because I do think that was true in this case. They each had their own backstories and characters that they designed, and they were all AIs. The only non-player character human was the founder of the colony. So the entire ship is inhabited by AIs, and a lot of the question of the piece is about redesigning a society. We all are on this ship because Earth isn't working anymore, and we've all decided to leave, and we've been chosen to leave. So how do we create a new society together? And what is it based on? And every night and every run of the show, the audience and the participants are charged with this job of sort of articulating what is the society that we want to be a part of, and how is it going to work? And the AIs have their own points of view. Are they second-class citizens, or are they part of the community? This is our founder from the Baby Castles run, who is a charismatic spiritual leader who obviously everyone suspects is somehow gonna be creepy and culty, and isn't. But that's part of it. I think it's an inquisition of why are we so resistant to forming community, and how come anytime things look like community, particularly in games like this, everyone says, oh, it's a cult, right? Particularly in America, I think there's a real suspicion of collectivity that this piece is really trying to challenge. I think a lot of my work is questioning the hero sequence. So many of our stories are about heroes being transformed, and I find that to be problematic because one thing that goes with heroes are villains, and the other thing about heroes is it locates transformation as part of an individual conquest, and it locates success as something that's done by oneself. And so a lot of my work is about challenging the capacity that we all have to form community in an active way, and that community is incredible and meaningful and dangerous and wild and sexy and interesting. It's not an oppression of individuality. And so that's definitely what this piece deals with a lot. And the AIs are part of that question. This is part of our scenography, which is a Nordic word. We say set design in America. We designed our ceiling with buckets, and we had LEDs above it. So the set design is mostly up in the air, which gives it this feeling of being in a really transformed space. Also, buckets are something we could afford. Our spaceship is way more like a pirate ship than like the Star Trek Enterprise. It's made of wood and plastic buckets mostly. Which is our aesthetic. It's a poor colony. It's not like a fancy colony. The engineers are one of the occupations who operate the archetypal resonance sequencer, obviously, which harmonizes all sorts of things inside of the ship, and is part of it's sort of the location of the major conflict of the ship. So here are a bunch of engineers trying to deal with this arcane code sequencer thing, and then putting some coordinating musical chimes. A lot of the jobs that we have are also musical in nature. And a lot of the narrative exposition that happens in the piece is musical. That's part of the idea. Again, keeping it, there's very little, there's not as much realism as it's coming out of a musical theater tradition where things are heightened and formalized. So a lot of the way that we communicate what the colony believes and how we're going to be organized is all musical, which I find to be really nice because it's again, music being a community function in a way, and also I think it's just less awkward, right? You can relate to music in a really easy way. We can stand there and listen to it without feeling like there's very much we have to do. There's our founder again, and this is one of the secondary rooms of the space. One of the other occupations is the healers. We designed a tarot deck that goes with the piece. It's inspired by the tarot deck, but it's its own thing, and all of the archetypes in the deck coordinate to some of the belief systems inside of the piece. So the tarot deck is sort of a roadmap for the belief system of the colony, which then the healers, these are both participants, the healers get trained on the deck and give readings to the other participants, which is an incredible way to build characters, which is you come and you get this really metaphysical reading about your fictional character, and it allows you to discover who your character is. It was one of the most successful elements of the piece because it was emergent, and because it really empowered the participants to feel like they had some magical ability to create the world. Here's a look at the deck. I have one of these decks with me if you want to look at it. We also had witnesses. They got devices, and they were charged with documenting what was happening. And so there was a meta online world of the piece that was happening in real time with these terrible Android phones that barely worked, but it was still fun. And the witness track was really designed also for people that really wanted to spectate, that were more uncomfortable with the role play element of it. But the witnesses always got involved really intensely because everyone, of course, was always suspicious of everyone else, and the witnesses became implicated in that. All the suspicion was mostly generated by the participants. We were all very kind robots, which for some reason they didn't believe us. I think we need to think about our distrust of robots. The theorists were another track, and they were charged with developing the philosophy of the colony. And one of the best parts of the piece was by the end of the piece, the theorists were required to present. And what was amazing about this moment is the theorists would get up and they would tell you about what they had decided and what they had learned. And it felt like the moment where you're riding the bike and you let the handlebars go. And here you have 100 player narrative game full of people that have never done anything like this. And as the creators of the piece and all the actors are doing absolutely nothing, standing there and the whole musical is just chugging along in some crazy direction that you have no idea what it is. And it was just always so moving to watch people articulate the society that they wanted to be in and that they wanted to generate. And it was and they were LARPing and they didn't know it, right? But they really were. They got really into it, and it happened every time. It was not like it always happened, and it was just, and because it was self-selecting, people that were more engaged could do that, and then it would inevitably turn into this rowdy town hall meeting, which was always great. Here's some more participants getting emotional. I don't know what's happening. And then all hell broke loose. There was a funeral. I won't give away the piece, but essentially there's a really big conflict inside of the world, which causes the colony to have to make a really giant choice. And the definition that the quote that I'm really interested in is from Anna Anthropy, who's a video game designer, who says, games are a type of theater where the characters are players and they have to experience the consequences of their choices. And it was imperative for me that this piece be that the choices that you make matter, and at the end of the piece, you have to really, it all comes to home for you, and you have to make a choice which is meaningful in relationship to the world. So I think I'm out of time. Am I out of time? Yes. This is one of the pieces I'm working on. I'm also working on a piece with Nina that we're going to play test tonight called The Eighth Palace, which is a much more smaller and a lot more Nordic version of some of the ideas that we've been working on. And it's also a very Nina piece for those of you that know Nina. And what's been really exciting about working with Nina is that I've been able to get theater grants in America and say, look at this amazing artist who, and framing a lot of our work as theater, which I think is really important to so much of what people get to experience is how it's framed. And so it's been really fun to just sort of unabashedly introduce these giant LARP ideas into theatrical worlds and watch people grapple with them. And then the other piece I'm doing is called Noise, which is another musical which starts as a linear narrative and then breaks apart and turns into this rhizomatic, random audience chaos. And again, drawing on a lot of what I've learned from this community. So I really think now's the time to start thinking about how audiences can take responsibility for the stories that we're telling one another, and how our stories have so much power to generate communities and to create the answers to the problems we're dealing with in our world. So thank you for all of your attention and your incredible work. It's so inspiring. And come talk to me. Bye.